All right, let's take a look at actually making the plot for coding challenge number 5. Now, I am using an actual API key, but just so that you can see kind of what it's supposed to look like, this is a fake API key. It's my API key, but I've changed a bunch of values so that it won't work. I mean, technically, I guess it's possible that this is someone's API key, but probably not, right? There's a bunch of randomness in the background. Long story short, this is in a text file called .fake_API_key, and it's just text. My actual API key I've got in a file called .API key, and when I load that, you can see that shows up on my environment, but I'm covering that so that I'm not sharing this on the open internet. I might move my camera in a second, but let's go ahead and take a look at this. I'll explain my code as I'm going, but I'm not going to focus too much on it. I'm mostly focused on actually getting the plots. So let's clear things out. I don't need to install these packages, but I do need to load in the packages that I'm using, FredR and the Tidyverse. I need to load in my API key from that hidden file. And then I need to use the FredR library to set my key to the value of that. Cool, that's done. Now actually, you know what I can do? Is I can say let's remove API key, and then that way I just don't have it down here. It's in there. I'll put myself over here. It's in the system. The FredR library knows the value to use, but it's fine. Now I just have these series in a vector just to keep them together, and then I've created a little function just to make this a little bit easier for me. So the function takes some series ID, and it's going to use the FredR library to pull that series, and then to make some changes that are going to make it easier for us to merge things together. All right, so I'm creating some data frame that I get from FredR, and I mutate to say d_value is going to be this vector. This vector is an NA, just an empty space, and then the diff of all those values. So the value column that we should get from FredR, this will be something like, let's say we're looking at interest rates. We'll see 5%, 5.1%, 5.2%, 4.8%. This diff is going to say, start with a blank, and then we go from 5 to 5.1, that's a diff of 0.1, and then to 5.25, whatever it was, right? These numbers I made up. It's just asking how much do these values change as we go, right? So instead of looking at here's our data like this, that diff is going to ask, what's the slope? And maybe that slope is positive but getting smaller, whatever, right? This is just looking at variation. So our difference in value is the differences of the values, is a way to read that. And then we do a little bit of pivoting. So we take that df, we pivot wider, and we're getting our names from a column called the series ID. You'll play with this stuff, but play around with it. You'll see how I made this function, or why I made the choices that I made. And then I'm modifying some column names to add this d_ to some series IDs, and then I'm spitting out this modified data frame that I made within this function. So let's go ahead and run one of these. So here's df1. We got an error. Oh, let's load in the function. Now let's try it. df1. Good, everything worked, no errors. We got this function, we got our values. df1, we've got date, real-time start and end. We've got d, and then the thing itself. So actually we can notice right here, our values are 118,651, 118,859. So going from the first value to the second, that increased by $209. The next one increases by 259, and so on. Right? That's what we've done here. df2, we'll just run these, and then the go above and beyond was find some other data to throw into here. I just chose the New York house price index, which I can get directly by passing this into the function that I made, and it's doing all that hard work here. Right? So rather than have all this code and all this cleaning repeated 4 times, we just put it in a function once, and then we call the function 4 times. And it becomes a lot easier to fix any mistakes that we might have. Right? Or if the FredR library changes and we need to change our code, it's easier to fix it in one place in the function than to fix it 4 times. If for no other reason, then we don't have to literally do it 4 times. But especially because the more we repeat, the more chance we have to make a silly mistake. So we've downloaded our data. Let's get df4 also. We've downloaded a bunch of data. Now we're going to join that all together into a thing called df. And then we're going to do some mutations. And all of this. So here I found a helpful Stack Overflow question about linear interpolation. I'm basically trying to fill in blank spots with something in between. So if we see the New York Housing Price Index has a value for January and one for March over here, then we're going to say here's February right in between on that line. We're doing that, and then here's the real meat of it. We've got our ggplot. Now let's just go ahead and take a look at what we get. So we put that all through, and we've got some stuff. It's a little bit messy, doesn't look super exciting, but tidying it up and making it look beautiful is the next step. We've got it set up, and at that point we can do something with it. For example, relabeling our y-axis to something like housing price index. We probably also want to have a legend in here so that we can see what are the various values actually representing. So our green line represents, I forget what that is. The black line is our US housing price index. Blue, the dots, is the New York housing price index. So we can see pretty clearly. Let's see if I can make this a line. I don't know why that's not working. Sometimes we just end up doing a hacky way around this. Let's try that way. Couldn't begin to tell you what's going on there, but that's fine. The point is not to get things perfect. The point is to get things good enough. So what have we got that you guys should be thinking about? So one thing is this limit here. This is just a way to make it so that we don't have the old data going way back. Here, let me show you what it looks like if we don't do this. We comment out that line and we run it again. Our data goes way back to the 1970s, but not all of our data actually went back that far. Right? So a lot of it was much more recent. What if we change this value? So we set this to 3,000. That means 3,000 days before the current day, before March 20th, 2024. Let's replace that with a 6. Run it again. And you can see now it goes back further to 2010. It looks like we have data for that, so that's actually good. Let's make this 16. Now we're going back further. I'm going to make this a little see-through. So with alpha equals, let's call it 1/10, it's going to make the blue dots, partially translucent. So now we can see through. We can see our green data only goes back to the year 2000. Our red data goes back to the late 80s, looks like 1986. Our black data goes back even further. Let's make that a 56 and see how far back we can go. Right, so if we go back way further, we can see for sure we're going too far back. Right, we don't have that data. If we go and just comment that out, is that going to work all right? That's good enough, right? We can see the green data starts late, but good enough. Now, like I said, we want the blue to be aligned, but time is scarce. We've got other things. For this, what matters is that we've got a lot of data portrayed on our graph. Now, if I was getting this ready for a publication or to do a presentation or to write a report to my boss, I would take the time to figure out how to turn these points into lines properly. And in practice, sometimes there's just these fiddly little things that you have to kind of dig in and figure out, why isn't this doing exactly what I want? But the marginal benefit of doing that in this case is just not high enough for me. So I'm just going to use geom_point. If you have to do that for this assignment, that's fine, right? What I care about more is that you're getting multiple things on this. Now, there is another way we can do this with the base R approach. Now, for that, it gets a little bit trickier. So let's go ahead and look at head of df. So we've got our date. So I'm going to plot df dollar date is going to be our x, and then df dollar, let's say DUSSTHPI. And by the way, we can see on this graph that this difference, it's all around 0, right? So it's, and some of these we had to divide, right? We divided the housing prices by 1,000. So instead of saying 100,000, we're looking at 100, right? It's just kind of squeezing things to a similar scale, just so it's visually easier to see how the waggles in the green line compare to the waggles in the black line. So let me just run this plot. That didn't work. We need an underscore. Figure margin's too large. So let's try dividing this. No. Figure margin's too large. What is the deal? Dev.off just kind of tells R whatever graphical stuff we're doing, we're done. So let's see if that sorts things out. Nope, still the same error. I could swear that I have solved this before. So you know what, let me grab my email and check, where have I got this? Blah, 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 blah. Did some of that. Oh, here we go. That should be fine. That should be fine. Type equals L for line. Color equals red. We'll skip most of that stuff. Date, value. Let's try just that. Still no. Date, real-time start. Well, so here's another case of marginal cost, marginal benefits. Let me pretend as though this worked. So if we get this showing the date on the x-axis and the change in the New York Housing Price Index on the y-axis, and we want to compare that to the US Housing Price Index, instead of using plot, we can use the function lines, and this is going to put those lines on top of the same plot. So if we put this, hasn't called yet, if we put this, it should work, and of course today it just isn't working. Why is that the case? Well, I'm not sure, but let's try doing a quick Google search and see if we can't get something. How to fix this, blah, 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 blah. Receive an error, increase the size of the plot panel. Okay, let's see if we can't make that work. So there's our plot panel maximized. No. Zoom out as much as we can. And let's try it again. There we go, that's better. It's still not doing everything I want, but it's doing something. Now, let's change this to blue. Still not doing that. And let's divide by 10. See if that helps. You can see that our y-axis is shrinking. Our dates are showing the year. The axes look like they're supposed to look. Let's change this. I'm going to get rid of this type. There we go. Now it's at least points. And I think points is the thing. There we go. So, slight nuisance, and you can see the base R version. It's not as pretty as the ggplot version that we had before. But we have managed to get 2 data series on the same plot. Now, if we were then to go, let's say, points, df dollar date is our x, df dollar, let's do d underscore USA, yada, 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 color equals green. When we run that, notice it's not showing up at all. Now, to see why, let's change that to plot. When we plot this, we can see our values are between -2,000 and +6,000. That plot we had was between -1 and 5. So we just didn't see them because they just weren't there. So if we divide this by, say, 1,000, now it's on a pretty similar scale. So let's try changing that back to points. Run our plot. Our next points over top of that, and some more points over top of that. So now we've got 3 things on the same plot. Again, we're using points instead of lines. Slight nuisance, but sometimes you just do a hacky thing to get something on the page. It's better to have an imperfect project that you can fix than perfect code that doesn't work. And that's the compromise we're making today. In any case, as you run into problems trying to make this actual lines instead of points, don't hesitate to reach out. If you find a good solution to this, share it on the Discord server or the discussion on Brightspace, and I will talk to you all in the future.